For most of human history, this one part of your body could get you exiled. Not for anything you did, just for bleeding. Half of everyone who has ever lived has faced this every month, for hundreds of thousands of years. And history barely wrote a single line about it. 40 pages on how they built the roads. Almost nothing on how half the population simply lived. So let us ask the question the old historians would not. What did it actually cost you to bleed? Because the blood was always the same, the story around it was not. And that story decided everything about how you were allowed to live. In most ancient worlds, this was seen as either deeply sacred or deeply dangerous, sometimes somehow both at once. Start in Egypt, where they handled it better than almost anyone after them. They wrote it down instead of hiding it. One of the oldest medical texts on earth discusses it plainly. Women there likely used softened papyrus as a simple pad, or rolls of soft linen, washed and used again. And here is the part that mattered most. It was not shameful there. It was tied to fertility, to the goddess, to the flooding of the river. The great river rose and fell on a cycle, the way a body does. They looked at that and saw meaning, not a curse. A woman was not locked away, she simply kept living her life. Now hold that image, because the next civilization ruins it. Greece gave the world philosophy, mathematics, and one spectacularly wrong idea. A celebrated thinker declared that your blood was failed semen. His logic, a woman's body tried to be a man's and simply fell short. This was not a fringe crank, this was the mainstream view for centuries. So your monthly biology became proof you were somehow lesser. But set aside what the men wrote, what did women actually do? They used wool, soft, absorbent, and everywhere in a land of sheep. Small wool plugs and pads, the earliest tampons essentially, held in place with cloth belts around the hips. Their doctors, at least, treated a missed period as a real medical concern. So the same culture held both a careful physician and a ranting philosopher. Brilliant and unhinged at the same time, very Greek. Then Rome, which gave us law, concrete, and one very confident fool. He wrote an encyclopedia, and his section on this is a masterpiece of nonsense. He claimed a bleeding woman could kill crops just by walking past. Blunt swords turn wine to vinegar, kill bees, drive dogs mad. Rome genuinely treated women on their periods as walking hazards. Of course, real Roman women knew this was garbage and lived anyway. They used soft cloth, wool, and natural sea sponges from the coast. The warm Mediterranean Sea handed them a soft tool for free. Absorbent, soft, washed and reused. But here Rome shows a gap that runs through this entire story. Rich women had fine linen and servants to wash it. Poor women, and most were poor, had rough rags and whatever they could find. The material was never really the hard part. This next thing was. Taboo, the rules a culture wrapped around your body. In some ancient laws, a bleeding woman was declared untouchable for days. She could not touch others or certain objects until she was purified. In some traditions, a man who touched her was warned he would lose everything. His wisdom, his strength, his sight, all supposedly drained by her touch. Barred from cooking, from temples, from ordinary contact. These rules were never about hygiene, they were about purity, a separate thing entirely. Some texts went further, kept apart, given little food, denied fire and water. Across many cultures, she moved to a separate hut for those days. And here the story splits in two. In some places, that hut meant she was unclean and dangerous. In others, it meant she was at her most powerful and being honored. Same room, same blood, opposite meaning. Whatever the framing, she still had to manage it with what she carried in. Jump to medieval Europe, and for most women it was simpler and harder. Thick dark skirts, constant labor, and often just bleeding into the cloth. Stopping your day, for it was a luxury a working woman could not afford. Wealthier women folded soft linen rags, belted in place, washed and reused. And their doctors had a strange, almost helpful theory. They believed the body was purging excess blood, a natural cleansing. So a missed period alarmed them, and they prescribed herbs to bring it on. Parsley, pennyroyal, wormwood, tansy, they knew their plants. And some of those herbs genuinely worked, which matters more than it sounds. Because the same plants sat at the crossroads of medicine and control of the body. The same herb that eased a cramp could also end a pregnancy in the right dose. That knowledge lived in women's hands and mostly never touched a page. In China, the view of your body was completely different. Not a broken man, a complete system, simply its own. There, your monthly cycle was a window into your entire health. Its timing and color were reading material for a careful physician. Women used soft pads of silk or cotton by what they could afford, held with woven waist belts, much like a modern reusable design. And later, undergarments with sewn-in pouches, the true ancestors of the modern pad. Plus refined herbal formulas to ease cramps still used today. Across the ocean, colonization erased most of what indigenous women knew. But we know their blood was treated as holding real ritual power. Aztec women likely used fibers from the agave plant. And in many North American nations, the Moon Lodge was no punishment. She had her own foods, her own herbs, her own quiet customs there. It was closer to a monthly retreat she returned from with renewed standing. Now here is the fact that surprises almost everyone. The modern disposable pad is barely over 100 years old. The first one in the late 1800s flopped. Women were too shamed to buy it from a man at the counter. It only caught on when a campaign finally called it a normal necessity. So let that land. For almost the entire human story, women managed with cloth, wool, and leaves, and lived full, active, working, powerful lives while doing it. Which tells us three quiet things. First, women were never helpless victims of their own bodies. They built practical, clever answers and refined them over generations. Second, the real obstacle was almost never the materials. Wool and cloth existed everywhere. The problem was the story a culture chose. Call it sacred and she lived freely. Call it shameful and she was caged. Third, men wrote the record from the outside and got it wildly wrong. The crop-killing nonsense tells us what men feared, not what women knew. The real knowledge lived in women and was almost never written down. There is one more thing we skipped, the pain. Cramping is real, physical, and as ancient as the cycle itself. It was never invented by the modern world. Every ancient text mentions it. And every one of these cultures tried to treat it. Warm compresses, herbal teas, ginger, cinnamon, fennel, chamomile. Not random folklore, real knowledge from women trying things and reporting back. The deep irony sits right here. For all the nonsense men wrote, the women's practical knowledge was sophisticated. They figured it out because they had to. If this made you see half of history a little more clearly, stay with us here. Subscribe, and the next quiet question will find you when it is ready. And share it with the women in your life who were never written into the story. We fill museums with ancient weapons and the names of kings. But the most universal human experience of all barely made the page. Every generation of women on every continent faced this and found a way. No school taught it, no emperor decreed it. It simply had to be solved, and it was. They found solutions, they built knowledge, they passed it hand to hand. That is history, real, ordinary, remarkable history. We only had to dress the question up just to get you to look. Which says a lot about what we decided was worth remembering. So the next time someone calls this taboo, remember the most famous queen of Egypt lived this every month like anyone. Remember that queens, peasants, and priestesses all lived it, and carried the knowledge that kept them whole, quietly all the way to you.